My name is Jade Miller, and I am 26 years old. I am not a princess. I don't wear tiaras, and I definitely don't dream of a fairy tale wedding. I am a mechanic. My hands are usually stained with grease, and I spend my weekends under the hood of classic cars. 3 days ago, I walked into my garage to find the bay empty. My parents had sold my grandmother's 1967 Mustang Fastback, the car Grandma Rose and I had spent 10 years restoring bolt by bolt, and used the $80,000 to pay for the venue of my sister Tiffany's wedding. They thought Grandma Rose was too senile in the nursing home to notice. They thought I was too low class to fight back. They were wrong. When I told Grandma what they had done, she didn't get angry. She didn't yell. She simply put down her knitting needles, picked up her phone, and made one call that would turn my sister's perfect day into a nightmare. Before I tell you who she called and exactly how she dismantled my parents' lives at the rehearsal dinner, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you believe that thieves should get what they deserve. Drop a comment below. What is the one possession you would never forgive someone for selling? Now, let me take you back to the Tuesday it all happened. I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the auto shop. I was tired, smelling of motor oil and exhaust, but I was smiling because I had finally ordered the original steering wheel for the Mustang. That car wasn't just a vehicle. It was my soul. Grandma Rose had gifted it to me when I was 16, a rusted shell that we had brought back to life together. But when I rolled up the garage door of my parents' house where I paid rent to store the car, my stomach dropped. There was nothing but a small oil stain on the floor. I ran into the house, panic rising in my throat. Mom! Dad! Where's the car? My mother, Diane, was sitting at the kitchen table with my younger sister, Tiffany. They were surrounded by flower samples and cake catalogs. They looked up, annoyed by my intrusion. Lower your voice, Jade, my mother said, sipping her wine. We're trying to decide between orchids and hydrangeas for Tiffany's centerpieces. I don't care about the flowers, I snapped, my hands shaking. Where is Grandma's Mustang? My father, Robert, walked in from the living room, looking far too pleased with himself. It's done. You sold it? I whispered, the room spinning. That wasn't yours to sell. Grandma gave it to me. Grandma gave you a pile of rust, Tiffany chimed in, laughing lightly. Dad sold a restored classic. Besides, Jade, look at you. She gestured to my dirty coveralls. You look like a janitor. That money is going towards my wedding at the plaza. It's going towards something beautiful for this family. For once, my father crossed his arms. Tiffany needs a perfect start with the Harrison family. We needed the deposit money. You can always find another junk car to fix up, Jade. It's just a hobby. Just a hobby. 10 years of sweat, blood, and memories with my grandmother, sold so Tiffany could have expensive flowers for one day. I looked at them, my mother arranging petals, my father checking his watch, my sister glowing with entitlement. Does Grandma know? I asked quietly. Grandma is confused half the time. Mom waved a hand dismissively. And you aren't going to upset her by telling her, are you? It would be cruel. Do you want to be responsible for giving her a heart attack? I turned around and walked out the door without another word. They thought silence meant submission. They didn't know that I was already driving to the nursing home. And they certainly didn't know that Grandma Rose wasn't confused at all. She was just waiting for the right moment to strike. To understand why that empty concrete slab in the garage felt like a physical blow to my chest, you have to understand what that car represented. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was the only language my grandmother and I shared that my parents couldn't translate and therefore couldn't control. My parents, Robert and Diane, were obsessed with appearances. They viewed their children as extensions of their own vanity. Tiffany was their masterpiece. Blonde, petite, compliant, and obsessed with status. She was the golden child, the show pony paraded around at country clubs and galas. I, on the other hand, was the disappointment. I was too tall, too quiet, and far too interested in how things worked rather than how things looked. When I was 16, while Tiffany was being gifted a brand new convertible for getting average grades, Grandma Rose led me to the back of her dusty barn. She pulled a tarp off a rusted, beat-up 1967 Mustang Fastback. It had no engine, the upholstery was shredded, and it smelled like 60 years of neglect. Your father calls it an eyesore, Grandma had told me, handing me a heavy wrench. I call it potential. Do you want to help me prove him wrong? For the next 10 years, that car became my sanctuary. While Tiffany was taking dance lessons and shopping for prom dresses on my parents' credit card, I was working double shifts at the local garage to buy parts. Grandma Rose and I spent every Sunday under that hood. She wasn't just sitting and watching. She was right there with me, teaching me that grease washes off, but incompetence is forever. We rebuilt the engine block from scratch. We sanded down the rust until our fingerprints were gone. We painted it a deep, defiant, cherry red. That car was the physical manifestation of my independence. It was proof that I could build something valuable with my own hands, without my parents' money or approval. And my parents hated it. They mocked me constantly. My mother would wrinkle her nose when I came in for dinner, asking why I couldn't pick a ladylike hobby. My father called the car the money pit and constantly urged me to scrap it. They refused to see its value because they couldn't take credit for it. But the moment a collector offered them $80,000, suddenly, the money pit became a family asset. Standing in that empty garage, the realization hit me with nauseating clarity. They hadn't just stolen a car. They had erased the one thing in my life that belonged solely to me. They had liquidated 10 years of my blood, sweat, and tears to pay for a 4-hour party for Tiffany. They viewed my labor as a resource they could harvest whenever they needed cash for their favorite daughter. It was the ultimate devaluation. To them, I wasn't a person. I was just a savings account they hadn't tapped into yet. My mother's warning echoed in my head. Don't tell Grandma. It would be cruel. They were counting on my silence. They were counting on me being the good daughter who would swallow her pain to keep the peace. But as I looked at the oil stain where my masterpiece used to sit, I realized that protecting their lie wasn't noble. It was complicit. I wasn't going to the nursing home to break an old woman's heart. I was going there to tell my partner that our project had been stolen. I wiped my eyes, got into my beat-up truck, and turned the key. The drive to the nursing home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but my mind was screaming with my mother's accusation. Do you want to be responsible for giving her a heart attack? I almost turned the truck around twice. I thought about just swallowing the loss, going back to work, and pretending that $80,000 of my hard work hadn't just been liquidated for a wedding reception. But then I remembered the way my father had smirked when he said, Grandma Rose's room didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like peppermint and old leather, a scent she had carried with her since her days as one of the first female drag racers in the county. She was sitting up in bed, looking at a photo album of our restoration projects. When she saw me, her eyes, usually sharp as a tack, narrowed with concern. You look like you've been crying, Jade, she said, her voice raspy but steady. What happened? I pulled a metal chair close to her bed. My throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. Grandma, I have to tell you something. And Mom said, it might hurt you. She closed the photo album and looked at me over her reading glasses. Your mother thinks a draft from an open window will hurt me. Tell me the truth. So I did. I told her about the empty bay in the garage. I told her about the collector, the $80,000, and the non-refundable deposit on the Plaza Hotel for Tiffany's wedding. I told her how Dad called our Mustang a junk car and how they laughed when I asked for it back. I braced myself for the beep of the heart monitor speeding up. I prepared to yell for a nurse. I expected tears, shock, or confusion. Instead, Grandma Rose let out a long, slow sigh. It wasn't a gasp of pain. It was the sound of a woman who had just lost a bet she desperately hoped to win. I knew this might happen, she whispered, looking out the window. You knew? I stammered. Grandma, they stole it. They stole the car. I know, my son, she said, turning back to me with a gaze that was terrifyingly lucid. I have watched him become this person for 40 years. But I prepared for the possibility that he wouldn't. My mind raced. Prepared how? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pointed to her bedside table. Hand me my phone, Jade. I passed it to her, confused. Her fingers, usually trembling from age, were steady as she scrolled through her contacts and pressed call on a number saved simply as Harold. She put it on speaker. 3 rings. Then a deep, professional voice answered. Rose, is everything all right? I'm dying, Harold, she said bluntly. But my mind is clear, and it is time. There was a pause on the other end. I understand. When? Sunday, Grandma said, her voice hardening like steel. Tiffany's engagement party is at the house. Prepare the documents. They crossed the line, Harold. They sold the Mustang. I will have everything ready, the man said. She ended the call and looked at me. The sadness in her eyes was gone, replaced by the fierce determination I remembered from our days in the garage. Grandma, I whispered. Who is Harold? Harold Jennings, she said. He has been my attorney for 30 years. Your father thinks he handles my affairs, but Harold answers only to me. What is happening on Sunday? I asked. She reached out and took my grease-stained hand in hers. Justice, sweetheart. Delayed perhaps, but justice nonetheless. I need you to do one thing for me. Anything. Go to that party on Sunday. Dress nicely, wear something that makes you feel strong, not like a mechanic, but like the owner of this family. And bring your patience. My patience? Yes. She smiled, a dangerous glint in her eye. Your father and mother need to learn that actions have consequences. And I have spent 5 years making sure that when the lesson finally came, it would be unforgettable. Justice, Grandma Rose had said. The word hung in the sterile air of the nursing home room, heavy and absolute. I squeezed her hand, which felt fragile like bird bones, but her grip was surprisingly firm. Grandma, I don't understand. If you call Harold, if we expose them, won't they just deny it? They'll say I'm lying, or that you're confused. Grandma leaned back against her pillows, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. That is exactly why we are waiting until Sunday, Jade. Your father sold my car in secret. He humiliated you in the privacy of your own home because he knew no one was watching. He relies on your silence. She looked me dead in the eye, her expression sharpening. The lesson needs witnesses. Witnesses? I asked. The Harrison family will be there. Your father's business partners will be there. When a man builds his castle on a foundation of lies, you don't tear it down in the dark. You wait until he invites everyone inside to admire it. She reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear, a tender gesture that contrasted with the steel in her voice. I need you to promise me something. Go home, dry your tears, and say nothing. Let them think they have won. Let them brag about the wedding venue and the flowers. Can you do that? It will be hard, I admitted, thinking of the empty garage bay. Courage is never comfortable, she whispered. Now go, dress nicely for the party. Wear something that makes you feel strong, not like their employee, but like their equal. And bring your patience. The next 3 days were a masterclass in torture. I returned to my parents' house and walked past the empty spot where my Mustang used to sit. The oil stain was still there, a dark bruise on the concrete. Every time I walked through the kitchen, I had to listen to my mother and Tiffany gushing over the wedding details. The plaza confirmed the deposit. Tiffany chirped over breakfast on Thursday, scrolling through her phone. It's going to be magical. The Harrisons are going to be so impressed, Dad. Only the best for you, Princess, my father replied, sipping his coffee. He didn't even look at me. To him, the transaction was over. He had converted my junk hobby into social capital, and he was sleeping soundly at night. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the wedding binder across the room and tell them that Grandma Rose wasn't confused, that she was sharpening a blade they couldn't see. But I remembered Grandma's words. Bring your patience. So, I bit my tongue. I went to work, turned wrenches, and scrubbed the grease from my hands until they were raw. I channeled all my rage into silence. On Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Miss Miller, please come to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. We have documents to review before the party. Harold Jennings. I stared at the screen. The trap was set. My parents were busy inflating balloons and ordering champagne, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up. On Saturday morning, I parked my rusted truck outside a brick building on the outskirts of the city. I wiped my hands on my jeans one last time, a nervous habit before pushing open the heavy oak doors. The office was nothing like the chaotic, noisy auto shops I was used to. It was silent and smelled of old leather and expensive paper. Harold Jennings sat behind a mahogany desk that looked large enough to land a plane on. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, moving with the precise, deliberate energy of a clockmaker. "Jade Miller," he said, extending a hand. "Your grandmother speaks of you constantly. She tells me you're the only one in the family who knows the value of hard work." "Mr. Jennings," I replied, sitting in the leather chair opposite him. "Grandma said you had documents to show me before the party. Please, call me Harold." "And yes, I do." He folded his hands on the desk, his expression serious. "Your grandmother is a remarkable woman, Jade. She is also far more astute than her children give her credit for. She has been observing them for years." He pulled a thick file from his drawer. "Tell me, Jade, do you know who owns the house your parents live in? The one where they are hosting this engagement party tomorrow?" I frowned. "They do. Grandma gave it to them when Grandpa died 10 years ago." "Is that what they told you?" Harold asked, a faint, dry smile touching his lips. "It's certainly what they tell everyone. But they are wrong." He slid a document across the desk. I looked at the header. Property deed. The owner's name was printed in bold black ink. Rosemary Miller. "Your grandmother allowed Richard and Diane to live in that house rent-free," Harold explained calmly. "But she never transferred ownership. Not legally. Not ever." My head spun. "But Dad calls it his estate. He's renovated the kitchen. He built the deck." "He built a deck on a house he doesn't own," Harold corrected. "Legally, your parents are tenants at will. Your grandmother pays the property taxes. She pays the insurance. She kept the deed in her name because she wanted to see if her son would prove her fears wrong. Unfortunately, selling your car confirmed exactly who he is." Harold leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave. "And that brings us to the second document. 5 years ago, Rose established an irrevocable trust. She placed her most valuable assets, including the house and your 1,967 Mustang inside it, to protect them from financial misconduct." He handed me a copy of the trust agreement. My name was listed as the sole beneficiary. "Your parents didn't just sell a car, Jade," Harold said, looking me dead in the eye. "They sold a trust asset without authorization. In the eyes of the law, that is theft. And tomorrow, we are going to remind them that they are guests in your house." I walked out of that office shaking. For 10 years, my father had mocked my apartment and my job, acting like the lord of the manor. But the whole time, he had been living on borrowed land. I went home and looked at my closet. Grandma told me to dress like I owned the place. I pushed aside my coveralls and pulled out a sharp, navy blue blazer. It was time to suit up. Sunday arrived with a sky the color of bruised steel. I pulled my truck up to the curb, 2 houses down from the driveway, to avoid leaking oil on the pavers my father was so proud of. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The navy blue blazer fit perfectly, sharp and authoritative. I didn't look like a mechanic today. I looked like someone who had come to collect a debt. My parents' house, Grandma's house, I corrected myself, was buzzing. Catering vans were parked in the street, and the front lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life. Inside, the air smelled of expensive perfume and champagne. There were about 40 guests. I recognized my father's golf buddies, a few neighbors, and the entire Harrison family, Tiffany's future in-laws. The Harrisons were old money, the kind of people who looked at a price tag and called it vulgar. My father was terrified of them. I walked into the living room, keeping my back straight. The first thing I saw was Tiffany. She was wearing a white cocktail dress, holding a flute of champagne, and laughing at something Daniel Harrison said. She looked perfect. She looked expensive. She looked like $80,000 of stolen car parts. My mother spotted me instantly. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she plastered it back on. She hurried over, gripping my arm tightly. "You're late," she hissed, her voice low. And thank God you cleaned up. Please, Jade, don't mention the garage. Don't mention your job. The Harrisons think you consult for an automotive firm. I fix engines, Mom, I said flatly. I don't consult. Just smile and be quiet, she snapped, before turning away to greet a guest. I stood in the corner, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching my father hold court by the fireplace. He clinked a spoon against his glass, silencing the room. If I could have everyone's attention, Robert announced, beaming. He placed a hand on Daniel Harrison's shoulder. We wanted to give this young couple the start they deserve. That is why we are thrilled to announce that the wedding will indeed be held at the plaza this June. Applause rippled through the room. Tiffany squealed and hugged him. We spared no expense, my father continued, his chest puffing out. It took some smart asset management this week. But for family, we make it happen. Smart asset management. That was what he called stealing his mother's property. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my patience wearing thin. Isn't that generous? A woman next to me whispered. The plaza is a fortune. It certainly is, I muttered. My father was basking in the admiration, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch. He had no idea that the man standing quietly in the foyer archway, holding a leather briefcase, was about to strip him naked in front of everyone he was trying to impress. I caught Harold Jennings' eye. He gave me a barely perceptible nod and stepped into the light. Actually, a deep voice cut through the applause. I think we should discuss exactly whose assets managed to pay for that venue. The room went dead silent. My father dropped his hand from Daniel's shoulder. My mother froze. The executioner had arrived. The silence in the living room was absolute. My father's champagne glass hovered halfway to his mouth, his face draining of color as he recognized the man standing in the archway. Who is this? Daniel Harrison asked, looking between my father and the stranger. My name is Harold Jennings, the attorney said, walking into the center of the room with the calm authority of a man who had destroyed better men than my father. He placed his briefcase on the dining table, right next to the wedding cake samples. I am Rosemary Miller's personal attorney. Mother has an attorney? My father sputtered, his laugh sounding brittle and nervous. Since when? I handle her affairs. Since 30 years ago, Richard, Harold corrected him coolly. You would know this if you had ever asked her about her life instead of just her bank account. Harold opened his briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. Mrs. Miller has asked me to address some urgent matters regarding her estate, Harold announced, his voice carrying to the back of the room. Specifically, regarding the smart asset management you just boasted about. My mother stepped forward, her hands trembling. This is a private family party. Actually, Mrs. Miller felt that since the assets were sold to fund a public display, Harold gestured to the lavish decorations. The correction should be public as well. He held up the document. 5 years ago, Rose established an irrevocable trust to protect her most vulnerable assets from what she termed financial misconduct. Included in that trust was the 1,967 Mustang Fastback, VIN number 7, R02C104558. The room gasped. I saw Tiffany's eyes go wide. Per the terms of the trust, Harold continued, relentless. That vehicle was assigned to a single beneficiary. Not Richard. Not Diane. And certainly not Tiffany. He turned and looked directly at me. The sole owner of the vehicle is Jade Miller. That's a lie, my father shouted, slamming his glass down. Champagne splashed onto the hardwood floor. She manipulated her. Mother is on medication. Your mother is fully lucid, Harold said, his voice turning to ice. I have a signed affidavit from her physician dated this morning, which means, Richard, that when you sold that car on Tuesday for $80,000, you didn't liquidate a family asset. You committed grand larceny and trust fraud. Harold turned to the Harrison family. Mr. Harrison, a man who built his fortune on reputation, looked horrified. He took a subtle step away from my father. The $80,000 currently on deposit at the Plaza Hotel? Harold said, driving the final nail into the coffin, is stolen money. It belongs to the trust, and by extension, to Jade. Tiffany let out a strangled sob. But, but it's my wedding. The deposit is non-refundable. Then I suggest your father finds another way to pay it back, Harold said calmly. Because if that $80,000 is not returned to the trust within 30 days, I have been authorized to file civil and criminal charges against your parents. I watched the blood drain from my sister's face. She looked at Daniel for support, but Daniel wasn't looking at her. He was staring at my father with a look of pure disgust. The perfect start my parents had bought for her was dissolving in real time. But Harold wasn't done. He reached back into his briefcase. Now, he said, picking up a second document. Regarding the house we are currently standing in, Harold Jennings didn't give the room time to recover from the shock of the stolen car. While my father was still sputtering about misunderstandings, and Tiffany was sobbing over her canceled wedding venue, Harold reached back into his leather briefcase. Now, he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a torque wrench snapping a bolt. We come to the matter of the property we are currently standing in. What about it? My father snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. This is my house. You can't discuss my home in front of my guests. Actually, Richard, that is precisely the confusion Mrs. Miller wishes to clear up. Harold pulled out a document stamped with the county seal. He held it up for the room to see. This is the property deed, Harold announced. If you look closely at the owner of record, you will notice a distinct absence of your name. It reads, Rosemary Miller. The silence that followed was heavier than the first. My mother stepped forward, her face pale. That's a technicality. Mother gave us this house 10 years ago. She promised. She promised you a place to live. Harold corrected her gently but firmly. She never promised you ownership. There was never a transfer of title. There was never a sale. Harold turned to address the stunned guests, specifically locking eyes with Mr. Harrison. For the past decade, Richard and Diane have lived here as tenants at will. Rosemary has paid every cent of the property taxes. She has covered the insurance. You have been living here rent-free, entirely on her generosity. I watched my father crumble. His entire identity, the successful businessman, the lord of the manor, the man who mocked my garage apartment as squalor, was built on a lie. He was a 50-year-old man living in his mother's house. But we renovated the kitchen, my mother stammered, pointing to the marble countertops she loved to show off. We built the deck. You made unauthorized modifications to a property you do not own, Harold said. Legally, those are gifts to the landlord. They grant you no equity. Then came the final blow. Harold picked up the trust document again. Since the house is the primary asset of the Rosemary Miller Trust, Harold said, and since the trust is now active due to your financial misconduct regarding the car, the ownership of this property has been assigned to the sole beneficiary. He pointed at me. Jade Miller is now your landlord. The room erupted. Tiffany screamed, Her? The mechanic? This is insane, my father shouted. She poisoned her. She manipulated a dying woman. Richard, Harold warned, his voice turning to ice. I would advise you to stop digging. Every word you say is being witnessed. I looked over at the Harrison family. Mr. Harrison was whispering furiously to Daniel. They weren't looking at my father with respect anymore. They were looking at him like he was a bad investment, a liability. I saw Daniel physically step away from Tiffany, his expression cold. The perfect start my parents had tried to buy was gone, and now, so was the roof over their heads. Because of your attempt to defraud the trust, Harold continued, your tenancy is being formally reviewed. You are not being evicted today. However, effective immediately, you will be required to sign a lease agreement at fair market value, and you will be answering to Jade. I stepped forward. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in this house. I looked at my parents, who were terrified, and my sister, who was looking at me like I was a stranger. You told me I wasn't worth the investment, I said quietly, echoing the words my father had used to justify selling my car. It looks like Grandma disagreed. The party dissolved not with a bang, but with a suffocating, awkward whimper. Mr. Harrison didn't say goodbye to my father. He simply touched his son's arm and walked toward the door. Daniel looked at Tiffany, who was mascara-streaked and trembling in her white dress, and shook his head. "I need some space, Tiff," he muttered, pulling his arm away from her grasp. "My family can't be involved in fraud." We watched the Harrisons' luxury SUV pull away. Tiffany collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing into the cushions. The dream wedding at the plaza was dead, suffocated by the very greed that was supposed to fund it. The last neighbor hurried out, leaving the front door wide open. Finally, it was just us, the tenants, the lawyer, and the landlord. My father turned on me, his face twisted in a snarl. "You enjoyed this, didn't you? You poisoned her against us. You orchestrated this whole show to humiliate your own family." "I didn't do anything, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "Grandma made these decisions 5 years ago. I only found out this week. I didn't sell her car. I didn't lie to the whole neighborhood about who owned this house." "I treated you like a daughter," he shouted. "No," I corrected him. "You treated me like an employee. You mocked my job. You mocked my life. And you stole the one thing that belonged to me because you decided Tiffany's happiness was worth more than my dignity." Harold cleared his throat, stepping between us. "We are not here to debate parenting styles, Richard. We are here to discuss your housing situation. Legally, given the fraud, I can file for immediate eviction. You would be out by midnight." My mother gasped, clutching her chest. "Jade, please. We have nowhere to go." I looked at them. They looked small, broken. Part of me wanted to crush them, to let them feel the same helplessness I felt when I saw that empty oil stain in the garage. But Grandma Rose hadn't raised me to be cruel. She raised me to be fair. "I don't want them on the street, Harold," I said. "Are you sure?" Harold asked. "Yes." I walked over to the dining table, pushing aside a catalog of wedding cakes. "First," I said, holding up 3 fingers, "the $80,000 must be returned to the trust within 30 days. I don't care if you have to mortgage your business or sell your jewelry. The debt is real." "Second," I continued, "you will sign a lease agreement tonight. You will pay market rent, payable to me, every month. And third," I looked at the house I had grown up in, "you can stay here as long as Grandma is alive. But once she passes, you have 12 months to vacate. This house will be sold." "12 months?" my father whispered. "But this is our home." "It was never your home, Dad," I said softly. "It was a loan. And the loan has been called in." Harold laid the documents on the table. My father signed them with a shaking hand, not daring to look at me. My mother signed next, tears dripping onto the paper. They were no longer the kings of the castle. They were tenants, signing a contract with the daughter they had underestimated. 3 weeks after the party, the call came from the nursing home. I drove the Mustang, which I had recovered just days earlier, to say goodbye. Grandma Rose was weak, her breathing shallow, but her grip on my hand was surprisingly firm. "I watched how they treated you for years. I kept hoping Richard would change. I shouldn't have waited so long to give you the keys." "You didn't just give me keys, Grandma," I told her, brushing the hair from her forehead. "You gave me permission to stop being their doormat. You taught me that I could build my own life." She smiled, squeezed my grease-stained hand one last time, and whispered, "Keep building, Jade." She passed away that evening. The funeral was the final severance. I stood in the front row, wearing black, with the keys to the 1,967 Fastback in my pocket. My parents sat in the back, wearing dark sunglasses, looking like strangers at their own mother's service. They didn't speak to me. The shame of their public eviction was a wall they couldn't climb over. 6 months later, the dust has finally settled. My parents couldn't bear the indignity of paying rent to their daughter. They moved out before the lease was up, buying a small condo across town. We don't talk. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt, and I've learned that's okay. As for Tiffany? She called me last week. The golden child is now taking the bus to an entry-level marketing job. She told me, her voice trembling. "I think being the favorite was a trap. I never learned how to survive on my own." You did. We aren't best friends. But for the first time, we are sisters living in reality. I still live in Grandma's house. I turned the garage into a professional restoration shop. Every time I fire up an engine, I think of her. And that brings me to you. If you have watched this story from the beginning, if you have ever felt like the spare part in your family, or if you've been told that your labor doesn't matter because it doesn't look the way they want it to, listen to me. You are not a bad investment. I spent 26 years trying to fix my relationship with my parents, thinking that if I just worked harder or stayed quieter, they would finally value me. But Grandma Rose taught me the most important lesson of all. You cannot repair people who prefer to remain broken. And you cannot earn love from people who only view you as an asset to be liquidated. The real inheritance Grandma left me wasn't the house or the car. It was the boundary. It was the realization that no is a complete sentence. I am Jade Miller. I am a mechanic. I am a landlord. And for the first time in my life, I am free. Thank you for following my journey. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut off family to save yourself? I'll be reading your stories.